Wait for that to disappear. There we go. Sip my coffee real fast. We'll get right into it. All right, so today we're going to go over how I visualize and came up with an end product for each scene from the JINX video. Now, there's something that I see in a lot of specifically 3D work, where sometimes it's just like throw a camera into a scene, the scene looks cool, and then just render out whatever image the camera has in it and roll from there. What I wanted to go over was how I came up with the look of each frame, kind of what was in my brain and how that translated into this video. Some of it is one for one, some of it I came up with later, so we're gonna hop right into it, and you'll be following along with my screen. Without any further ado, let's go. All right, so first frame here. So this one, it kind of goes side and side with what we talked about yesterday as far as coming up with a story. The finger guns and the docks were the big visualization for this piece. I wasn't quite sure how much lightning I wanted in it. Initially, I was thinking maybe it was just a singular light. Once I started to realize I would probably have a few other frames that lean that same direction, I decided to fill it with lightning instead. This is a cleaner image from that, but if you watch the clip back, it's pretty chaotic, but it does kind of have this very strong frame that even though the camera's moving around and there's a lot going on, it still feels pretty strong, and that's mostly due to the framing that I chose. And that's essentially that she's gonna be standing higher than anything else in the scene. So even these beams that run along the side, those don't even go up to her hips. They're pretty short, and it kind of helps her stand out. And even though this is a very empty scene, it feels like a strong shot, even though there's a lot of empty space in the scene. And you know, that comes down to the framing. You know, if this was directly behind her, maybe at like her midsection level, wouldn't be as strong of a shot, because then you'd have those posts. They'd be coming up to about her hips, maybe a little bit higher. You know, it might not look as flattering or as strong. So getting that camera right down to ground level where you can just see that little bit of defocused plank right there in the foreground, you know, that's exactly what I wanted to go after in this shot specifically. So we're gonna keep going. This one is kind of an interesting shot just because when it came to making it, it's all hand animated. The facial expressions were a big thing in this one. But one of the interesting things is when you watch it back in real time, like, you know exactly what's going on. But then if you like pause on a still like this is a very dirty frame. As far as there's lots of chromatic aberrations, stuff's out of focus, stuff is blurry. Even her hand that's supposed to be in focus, there's light that's being like thrown across her hand. You know, just a lot of imperfections. And I think that's something that really helps this video stand out, especially when you get some really strong frames. And something that people try to avoid, you know, when they throw out like a 3D render or like take, you know, the perfect photo. It's like, you know, don't let anything impede the detail, you know, make sure everything's in focus and sharp. Like, I want to be able to see everything. But then when, you know, you break something down like this, like, it's very messy, it's very noisy. You know, the lighting isn't like 100% correct, even though it's still like, you know, good lighting. It's things like that that help tie it into being, you know, a real shot. Like, I wanted you to feel like, you know, if she was an actress, she did this in real life, and it translated through a camera. And that's what it achieves. And it really, you know, brings that hand animation to the next level, because, you know, with hand animation, I could make it as perfect as I wanted. But I chose not to in this case, and I think it really paid off for the frame. This is one of the first frames that I had in mind when I found the JINX model. I really just had this idea, and this is kind of where the inception of actually making a full-on video, because I wasn't sure, do I want to make just one shot? Do I want to just render a single frame? It kind of came from this idea that, like, she was in the middle of a battle and just didn't care, and there was tons of destruction. It's dialed back a little bit from what I originally envisioned, but, you know, what I originally envisioned wouldn't fit the final video. But regardless, you know, it was always this idea. She's walking, she's shooting somebody, and she's dropping the gun that she was just holding, because it's empty or whatever, and kind of making it careless, she's having a good time. That was the inception idea for this frame. And I think it translated really well. If there's anything else that I would have done differently, it would have been add more background characters. Originally, the shot was much, much longer, and there were a lot of other background characters because it almost does like a complete 180, but it did not fit tonally in the video. And I decided to re-render a couple of things, and I just kept it to, the short what I wanted. If I could go back, I would add more characters in, but it was also struggling on my computers because so much of this is animated, and you can see there's a little bit of particle destruction going on in the background. So once those things started adding up and you have the subsurface scattering and all that, like it was rough. So I decided to just keep it to, this is what I need. This accomplishes the vision, kind of fits that minimalistic feel by not having so many characters in there. And she really stands out in frame. So, that's how we kind of got this end result. And then, adding the lightning and everything that came in After Effects. And I think it really pulls this whole thing together well. Moving on to this next shot. If you haven't watched the show, then like this shot might seem a little bit random. It does have to do with some of the lore from the show, but I envisioned this idea of just doing a shot that was two kind of mundane objects in sort of a supernatural state. So with that, they kind of do this levitation thing, but I knew from the beginning that I wanted this to be a super, super tight shot. I built the scene out a little bit more because I wasn't sure how tight I wanted to go, but the more I kept, doing iterations of this, I was like, no, we have to go tighter. We need to be closer. And once it came down to that, like it just became almost just these two objects. So you can see a little bit of the table underneath. There's some books in the background, and there is like a moving background back there. But, this main focus is on the goggles and the watch. And it's really the only time that we get like a super organic camera focus rack. There's a couple in the video as a whole, but generally speaking, like this one was like, you're looking at one object and then you're looking at another object in the same scene. And it really just ties together nicely. So this is one of those shots that I really came up with more in post than anything else. I knew I wanted to do a shot of her throwing her grenade. I didn't know how stylized I wanted to make it or anything like that. And again, this is one of those like really messy, all out, just expose every imperfection shots. As you can see, there's like tons of noise in her face. But then even the glow coming off of the grenade, that was done in Red Giant's optical glow plugin. They have a radiate setting, and they have different settings where you can actually stretch the direction of the glow. So I took advantage of all of that and just went all out and making this super stylized look on this, because I knew with the lighting setup that I had so many glints and whatnot, that would just feel like really organic and messy. And it's a grenade, and it's supposed to be that. But even something like this, that's all I had in mind. I didn't have a background in mind. I took the default cube in Blender, I threw a texture on it, and I stretched it out, and I was like, okay, that's kind of my ground. What else? And then I, went and got like all these nuts and bolts and pipes and stuff, and I just scattered them on the ground. Same principle as with the grenade. I was just like, if there's tons of stuff scattered on the ground and it's reflective, you're going to get a lot of stuff shooting back into the camera. So I went with that, and I'm really happy that I did, because I think it really, makes this shot far more dynamic than it was before. All right. Selfie video time. This selfie video was the last thing that I did. I'm starting to get into motion capture and understand it. And because it was my first time using motion capture, I was like, there's not really a better way to make sure that you don't show off the jank in your motion capture than by doing a selfie video, because you just take the camera, you attach it to the hand, then wherever the hand goes, that's where the camera goes, and it covers a lot of the jank. And so this was, like I said, this was one of the last things that I threw in. I did this like the day before I dropped the video, and I feel like it turned out pretty good. The facial animation was all done by hand. I recorded facial mocap, but it wasn't 100% working the way that I wanted it to. I really wanted to exaggerate it, like doing this eyebrow thing. I can't do that with my eyebrows. Overall, I think the shot turned out good. And, with it being a last minute thing, if I hadn't, taken the time to be like, what's that one more like icing on the cake idea? If I had just been like, it's too close to when I want to post this, and this wouldn't have ended up being made and would have detracted from the video as a whole. All right, moving on to one of my favorite frames of the whole video. It's this shot of JINX sitting on top of one of her grenades. Originally, I had this as her lying down. I was gonna occlude the grenade a little bit more and then pull out to have a larger reveal. But, after kind of going through and figuring out, I do test some of the shots to where I'm like, will this actually work? Like, I had this idea in my head, but does it actually, work when I throw it in the program? And so I tried a few different poses and whatnot, just like super rough to see if they would work, but none of them really were. And I was like, you know what? At the end of the day, I think the best thing for the project is instead of having her lay down, we're going to have her sit down, swinging her legs. It teases the grenade a little bit more and gives you some sort of structure for her to be on top of. And then when it pulls out to this wide shot, like this is exactly what I was envisioning as far as like super hazy. You get the idea that this grenade is massive. It doesn't make any sense, of course, but like the scale of it is really well shown here just because of things like the haze plays a big part, the fog, how much spread is coming from the glow and the light rays. The size of her in comparison, but she fits like really well on top of there. It was all part of, making this thing. And originally I actually had the camera go on the other side, but then just kind of looking at it, I was like, you know what, maybe we should flip this. And you have to always be like open to those ideas of just changing things on the fly while you're creating it, just being like, hey, you know what, maybe we try this. And in the end, it really benefited the shot. This is one of my favorite ones from the entire thing. And I'm really happy with how it came out. And again, little imperfections on here. You have chromatic aberration all over the grenade. She's super grainy. There's lots of light wrap to kind of, enclose her into that environment. But it all plays when you watch this back in real time. It's like, that looks like it's real, even though I know it's not. This one of the ones we did in Unreal, we took a look at the scene yesterday, just her sitting alone. We talked about the story and stuff behind it, but I wanted to talk about in this scene specifically, there's a very apparent artificial light above her. There's a spotlight that comes down. It gives her highlights. It's the most powerful light in the scene. And it's attached to nothing. If you sit here and you look at this, it's like, yeah, that's how it plays. In motion, and when you're just digesting the scene and you're understanding it, it doesn't matter. When you see this, you're like, she's alone. And that light helps drive that. It doesn't need to be attached to anything for you to understand what's going on. If you want to sit down and start to dissect it, sure, you can see, that might be out of place. But it drives the scene, it drives the image, and that's what I wanted. I wanted you to feel this isolation. I'm sure I could have moved it up, but I just loved the aesthetic of having it, come to that much of a point to where she feels that alone. So that's what ended up being the final shot. All right, throne shot. Lots of shots of JINX being alone, but that's kind of, her character and what I feel like would be fleshed out in a show about her. And that was one of the main things, is like, if they were actually going to make a show about her, what would the themes be? What would we actually see in the show? And these are the things that kind of popped into my head. So this one, I knew that I always wanted to have a shot of her on a throne. I wasn't sure what kind of throne. And so with that, I went looking for specifically something that had those cutouts so that light could just stream through it. And this one that I picked up, I believe it was from a guy named Nils Folker. He created it on Sketchfab 3D. So I grabbed it from there and I was super happy with just how this turned out. That little clove notch in the top, like right above her head, providing that little bit of light on the back of her hair. Like, it's those little things that really make this pop and stand out. And another thing with this scene, I apologize to anybody who has OCD, but one of the things that I wanted to do to keep this, idea of inconsistency, because I could do everything perfectly if I wanted to, but I chose not to, because that's kind of one of the themes in the show, and with her character specifically. I'll not spoil that end of it, but I wanted to leave as many imperfections as possible. So I purposely took the chair and put it off center frame by like mere pixels, like maybe 6 or 7 pixels. And at first you're like, yeah, it's center. But then if you stare at it, you're like, no, it's not. And, that was intentional. I had it squared up and it felt too perfect. And so I just moved it over just a hair. And then I was like, that's what I'm going for. And it's those little things that make this feel kind of grounded in reality a little bit. And I'm just super happy with how this frame turned out in the end. All right, and getting to the last frame of this. This is the one that I've shared everywhere, but it's because it's the one that one is just super cool. But it's like the frame that came into my head and came out exactly as I pictured it. I'm not really going to go into necessarily how I made it, but I just wanted to talk about how there's like this continuous theme. We have this light coming from above. It's coming from a single point. It's like a spotlight. I used to work a spotlight in a theater, like an old opera house, for many, many years. And so that's where like a lot of this inspiration comes from. But I love the organic feel of this. It feels like a moment frozen in time. And that's what makes it really, really, really cool. And what I want to touch on with this is one of those things where you can get as stylized as you want. Like, don't be afraid to go overboard when stylizing your shot. This is like way, way out there. As far as like what a shot should be, how it should be composed or set up or lit or any of that. But it was a matter of, just going out there, trying different things. This shot in total probably took the longest as far as doing the composite, setting it up, rendering it. Like, this one was definitely the one that had the most put into it, but reaped the most reward. And I'm really happy with how it turned out. All right, so that's it for really everything to do with this JINX video that I have put out there. Hopefully you learned something and were able to kind of grow through it and are able to apply these things to your workflows and your projects. If you are, please let me know either in the comments or join our Discord. I'll leave a link in the description and you can drop your work there. I would love to check it out. But at the end of the day, just go out there and keep trying to create something. Don't let anything stop you or don't let you feel like you're limited to something, because I would have never been able to create this video if I didn't keep trying other projects, if I didn't keep trying different things. And because of that, it brought this to light. When this opportunity came up, I was able to jump on it and be, fairly effective. So thank you guys for watching. If you have any questions, please let me know. I'll hopefully be doing more videos in the future. It just kind of depends on, different life circumstances. Certainly won't be doing any until, the new year at least. But yeah, until then, go and create something, guys. Take what you have and just go do something right now.